Hello, folks, and welcome to Club Passim. We are currently in the Alston branch of Passim, complete with my co-host over here, my cat. But thank you for tuning in, and thank you for bringing Passim into wherever you are. We are still remote, obviously. We have been bringing you remote shows since last March, and we are slowly seeing that light in at the at fall where when we can actually get back into the club, and we are so excited for those times when we can get back to a bit of normal. But until that time, we are going to be bringing you safely all of our shows, all of our programming that we have been for the past over a year now. In case you're not familiar with Passim, we're a nonprofit organization. We run a folk music venue in a little basement in Harvard Square. And we have moved all of our programming online. So we have shows almost every night of the week that we have been live streaming. And we've also moved our School of Music online. So if you want to take classes or workshops, you can continue to do that while we are remote. We also have two grant parts of Passim that we have continued to run to help artists in the New England community. And we continue to have a membership program with some perks. So if you would like to become a part of Passim, help support us and our mission, you can go to passim.org/support and become a member. And you'll get more perks once we're back in the room. And we don't have an exact date yet, but we're getting closer and closer. And for our show tonight, we are so excited to continue to be pairing with Tell&Act. Some of you may be familiar with the Mouth series that ran for several years, and Passim was happy to be one of the partners of Mouth, and they would come to our room monthly. And since this past 6 months or so, we have been partnering with the new company Tell&Act to bring you monthly storytelling series once again. If you'd like to support the show tonight, both Passim and Tell&Act, you can go to passim.org/stream and donate, which would be your ticket price for the night. We suggest a $12 donation, which is what the ticket would be in the room. And anything that you can give helps. If you can only give a couple bucks, that's great. If you can give more, that's great too. This is how artists and venues are making a living right now. So anything you can contribute is great. And if you can't give anything monetarily, share this stream with a friend. Participate in the chat. It is wonderful to have you in the community, and we want to know that you're out there. So if you're out there, say hey, say where you're coming in from. Well, I would love to turn things over to our host for tonight. I'd like to welcome one of the co-founders of Tell&Act, Anna Williams Collier.
Good evening, Abby. Good evening. Thank you so much for having us at Club Passim this evening. I'm really excited because we've got a wonderful show of really talented storytellers lined up for you all this evening. We have a show that's themed with stories themed on spring and summer, which I'm getting actually quite giddy about, this prospect of spring and summer and getting back out there and seeing everybody. But yes, as Abby said, my name is Anna Williams Collier. I work with Tell&Act with my incredible business partner, Cheryl Hamilton, who many of you will know from Mouth. But I want to get straight on with this show. We can talk a little bit more about storytelling later after the stories. There'll be a talk back. And if any of the audience have questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them for you. So I'm going to bring up our first storyteller, who is Mark Madrell, a very talented storyteller and, very familiar to the Boston area. So Mark, there you are. Hi, welcome.
Hi,
Mark.
Anna.
Hello, over the airways. I'm going to start. I just want to ask you a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask these questions to each of the tellers. First of all, when did you first tell a story to a live audience?
Probably the first swing would be very early in 2012 at a Moth Slam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what did that feel like?
Well, it was, the first feeling was utter panic. You get up in front of 200 people for the first time in your life and expound, and it's just kind of nerve-wracking at first.
So it seems that you've very much gotten over that. You seem very cool. You're a bit of a cucumber.
Well, you get used to it after a while. And
Mm-hmm.
the nice thing about also like a real live venue like Passim or the Moth was that the lights are in your face. You really can't see anyone. You just
Yeah.
know they're there, but you can't
Mm-hmm.
see them. So you can just sort of go ahead and tell your story.
That's true. Yeah, that's really true. Yeah, there could be like 1,000 people or two, and
Yeah.
doesn't make a lot of difference if the lights are in your face. And then, because obviously our theme for this evening is spring and summer, what is your kind of favorite thing to do in the summer? What do you associate with summer?
Well, when I was younger, I used to do a lot of expeditionary canoeing, across the Arctic and Northwest Territories and such.
Um,
And that's what I really loved doing. But as you get older, things start breaking, and it's harder and harder to do things like that.
yeah, yeah. But that does sound quite cool though, and to have those memories at least.
Yep.
I'm sure you can do sort of something else. Maybe just do a bit of rowing. Merrily, merrily.
Motorboat, maybe.
Maybe a motorboat. That sounds cool. Anyway, I'm going to hand the stage over to you. So please tell your story. Everybody, Mark Madrell, please welcome him to the stage. Not virtually.
Okay. It had been a really tough winter, one of the toughest I'd ever seen. After high school, I took a gap year. I moved to Anchorage to try on being an adult, and it was just my dumb luck. I happened to pick the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. I got there in October. There was already 3 feet of snow on the ground. I was at the library one day, and this homeless guy across the table from me, he flips down his paper, stares me right in the eye, and he says, "You can always tell the start of winter in Alaska when they start plowing up the street people." I went down to the state job office like every day for a while, but there was nothing. There was just 2 cards on the board, same 2 cards, they never moved. One of the cards said, "Underwater explosives expert, minimum 3 years experience in the Arctic Ocean." The first job offer I got was as a door-to-door encyclopedia salesman. And I was running out of money, but Anchorage, winter, that just did not seem like a good idea. It took a couple of months, but I finally got a job as a programmer for this little computer store, mostly because I had the temerity to walk in and ask, and the desperation. And then I got a second job working the night shift at the Anchorage Daily News. Winter in Alaska, they have a lot of night. And the winters there are just absolutely brutal. I mean, it's like 20 hours a day of dark, and then 40, 50 below zero. And people go a little crazy. In February, one of my roommates just snapped and he held me hostage until the cops came and broke the door down. Winter in Alaska also has the feature that it goes from all dark to all light. Starting in January, you start getting like 15, 20 minutes more daylight a day every week. So spring like lands with a big thud in Alaska. And in April, my day job, they hadn't made payroll in several weeks. And suddenly they announced that they were doing retroactive pay cuts. I mean, they hadn't paid us, so of course they could retroactively cut our pay, and they were going to go everything to commission. And I said, "That's it. I've had it. I quit. It's spring. There's got to be something better than this." So I decide I'm going to go hitchhiking around. My first hitch south was to Homer, and I got picked up by this guy in an MG that still had its snow tires on, and they were like too big for the car. Now, another thing about spring in Alaska is the frost heaves. All that moisture that's thawing starts percolating up, and it makes these humps that are like a foot or two high everywhere, including all over the highway. So we are bombing down the highway in this MG with the 2 big tires, and every 100 yards or so, we are launching off one of these frost heaves. And when we hit, we're just grinding the tires against the wheel wells all the way to Homer. Now in Homer, like the only thing there really is this big fish cannery. Every spring, like hundreds of people descend on Homer to pack fish. And there's these little tent cities that just are all along the spit going out to the cannery. And I try to blend in, but it's 40 degrees and it's raining and I last like 4 hours. Luckily, the guy who owns the youth hostel, he has a lot he needs cleared. So if you work 8 hours a day clearing wood for him, you can stay for free. And I got like the best salmon dinner I have ever had. On the hitch back north, I started talking about gun control with the guy who was giving me a ride. And after a while, he just reached underneath his seat and he pulled out this gigantic Colt 45. He said, "Nobody's taking this away from me." That's when I learned you don't talk politics while you're hitchhiking. I stopped at Denali National Park, but it's April, snow is everywhere, it's closed. So I sleep in the parking lot. I wake up in the morning and there is a squirrel on my chest. He had ripped open my pack and he was eating my bread. Before I had left, my former manager told me I really had to go see Chena Hot Springs north of Fairbanks. And it turned out that was like a 10-mile walk after my last ride. And I start walking. And another thing about spring in Alaska is the bugs. Black flies and mosquitoes that can literally kill you. I start walking down the road and they find me. They swarm me. I start jogging, trying to get away from them, and I can't, so I start running. And as I'm running, I run into another rite of spring. There are two beavers humping in the middle of the road. And I try to be polite. I'm running back and forth across the road. I'm running circles trying to give them time to finish. But finally, I just cannot take it anymore. I go running past them, and they hiss at me. And I eventually get to Chena Hot Springs. And I look around. Chena Hot Springs is a luxury resort. I've been hitchhiking for a couple of weeks, and I look at it. So I turned around and started walking back. A carpenter picked me up late at night outside Fairbanks, and he put me up for the night. We both slept on the floor in his apartment in our sleeping bags because he didn't have any furniture. The next day, I was hitchhiking down the Alaska-Canadian Highway, the Alcan, and back then it was a really crappy road. It was built crappy and windy in World War II because they didn't want the Japanese Zeros to be able to land. And when I get to Canada, for the only time ever in my life, I am issued a 2-day visa, 2-day entry visa to be in Canada. They're sick of hitchhikers just stopping and becoming illegals. I didn't think anything of it until the second day. I'm outside Whitehorse, and it's raining. It's been raining for 24 hours. And one car is going by an hour. Not stopping, just going by. And I start to think, maybe a JSL doesn't sound too bad. I get on the Inland Passage ferry at Haines. And after a couple of days, the ship runs aground, punches a hole in the bottom of the boat. And we spend the rest of the trip leaning sideways as they pump water out the other side. They dump me on the docks in Seattle at 2 a.m. I don't have anywhere to be. I just wander around the docks until sunrise. When I get to college in the fall, I'm a year behind. But I listen to the other kids, and they're all complaining about how unfair it is that the dining hall stops serving breakfast at 10. And I think, maybe I got an education after all. Thank you.
Wow, that was a pretty cool story. I'm a traveler myself, so I love listening to travel stories. And I think, traveling is an education, and listening to traveling stories is an education. So I very much respect that. Thank you for telling that story. Cool. Thank you. So I'm gonna keep it moving sort of swiftly because we're all going to come back and have a chat later. So I'm now going to introduce to you Muyani Kasume. Would you like to join me on the stage?
Hey.
Muyani, I'm going to ask the same. Oh, you there? Oh yeah, I'm going to ask you the same questions. I'm going to pose the same questions to you. Riani, when was the first time that you told a story on the stage?
I am pretty new to this, so this would be a few months ago in March. And that was a virtual story, so I'm pretty new to it.
Ah, a newbie. We love new people. It's, the more people, the more different stories is just, it's welcome to storytelling. And then what is your favorite thing about the summer, would you say? What is, like, traditionally your favorite thing?
I like to go to the ocean. So, growing up in a landlocked country, seeing the ocean as majestic as it is just an out to me. So, I want to get down there every summer and experience it because I know there's a lot of folks around the world, especially where I come from, that don't have that experience.
Yeah, I guess. I think, I that's something I've just realized. I kind of took the sea for granted because I come from this tiny blip of an island that's, Great Britain, and you can drive to the sea quite easily. So yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that, but it's pretty splendid, the ocean. So yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. But I'm now going to hand the stage to you so that you can tell your story. So, round of applause, virtual round of applause for you. I hand you the stage. Thank you, Muyani.
Thank you. It's 2002, and I'm in the United States for the first time. I'm from Zambia, and I'm here on an exchange program. But first, before I go for my exchange program, I need to do orientation at Wagner College in New York. And at this orientation, a couple things really stick out to me. One, they tell us that you have to look the American in the eye. And two, small talk is encouraged and that it is okay. And three, that you have to be on time. Now, this point was really, really emphasized. So one day when I was sitting outside the dining hall, a stranger approached me and asked, "Are you new here?" I answered that I was. There I was practicing my small talk and it really felt good. So we spoke for about 15 minutes and I learned that she was from Nigeria. And in the end, she gave me her number and said that I can call her if I needed anything while I stayed in the United States. And I said I would. But frankly, I didn't think much about our offer because I was too excited to begin my service. I was to volunteer with people with disabilities at a summer camp in upstate New York. Now, here, this is where I was introduced to organized care for people with disabilities. But shortly before the end of my volunteer service, I had a dilemma. One, either I go home immediately or spend a few months in the United States as allowed under the program. It's at that point that I remembered the Nigerian lady and I decided to call her. She picked up her phone, unfortunately, and I explained my dilemma and she said, sure, come on to New York and we can meet at our house 5 p.m. on Friday. Now, there was just one problem. Shortly after, I learned that the free buses to New York would leave on a Wednesday. So going on a Friday would have meant that I needed to find my own transportation, which was not good for me. One, I didn't know where I was going. Two, I had very little money on me. So I decided to go on a Wednesday. Arriving in Manhattan that September afternoon, I was hit by the sound of cars and the people and the buildings and the billboards. And if you've been to New York, the best way to check out the buildings and the billboard is really to look up. But when you are walking and looking up, sooner or later, there's going to be a disaster. So I kept on running into people. I kept on walking when everybody else had stopped. And after a couple hours, my suitcase was heavy and I began to drag it. I had very little money on me and I knew I couldn't afford a hotel. But I had seen an internet cafe that said that after midnight, it was $1 an hour to surf the web, and maybe, that was my plan, I could sleep there until 6 in the morning. And as it got darker, I was tired, I was hungry, I was thirsty, and so I bought myself a hot dog and a soda from a vendor. And next to the vendor was about a 3-foot wall that I sat on to eat my hot dog and drink my soda. And I sat there. I was just wondering where everybody was going. I mean, it's past 10 and people are still walking around. And after a while, I lay down on my backpack and soon I dozed off. Eventually, though, I woke up to the sounds of people and the increasing car noise and the sun, of course. It was morning and I couldn't believe it. I looked around first to see if I was okay. Second, to see if my bags were there, and they were there. And as I look around, I saw this sign that said Central Park. And you might be asking, who sleeps in Central Park, right? Well, I'll tell you. At that point, I didn't know I was sleeping in Central Park. And 2, I did not know how dangerous Central Park was. So quickly, I gathered my bags and headed to Staten Island early. And I told myself that I would go find this woman's address. That way, come Friday, I'm not going to get lost. And you might be asking right now, why don't you just call the woman? Well, I'd ask myself that question. But please remember, at orientation, this was really, really drilled into us, that you have to be on time. We had arranged to meet on Friday, 5 p.m. That's what I was going to do. And I was really, really determined to act American. Plus, this day, I also had a plan. I had a plan that I was going to sleep at the YMCA hostel, which, as you may guess, was also taught to us in orientation, that the YMCA had very cheap hostels. So now I was on Staten Island, and when I got there, I really, really got lost. And by nightfall, I still hadn't found the woman's address. So I asked the bus driver, who at some point stopped charging me because I'd gotten so lost, if they could drop me off at the nearest YMCA. And they did. And seeing the sign of the YMCA really, really got me hopeful. Finally, something that I had planned was happening. But as I got closer to the YMCA, it was dark and my heart sank, and I realized that it was under construction. At this point, I was hungry at myself, a little terrified even, and I openly questioned my decision to explore the United States. And it's one thing that you can accidentally fall asleep in a park, but this, I told myself, no. It was over frustrating. So I sat with my bags near the fence, by the edge of the bushes, and somehow, right there, I fell asleep on the construction site. Early the next morning, I was woken up by loud noise. I came out of the bushes and scared the construction guys. And I just walked away so quickly. I just wanted to get away. And that day, Friday now, I was determined to find this woman's address on foot. I told myself, I am going to find this woman's address. However, as I may have it, even with 2 days head start, I only could manage to find her address a few minutes before 5 p.m. So you may say that I was on time after all. Now, 5 o'clock sharp, I knock on the door with great expectation, but a man opens the door and my heart sinks. And, I'm thinking, not again, Miani, not again. I'm stepping back. I introduce myself with an apology. And then the man says, welcome. We've been expecting you. please come on in. I did not even think twice. I walked into the house. And I'd be asking, who just walks into a stranger's house? Well, I'll tell you, it's a person who slept outside for 2 days. But also, really, it's because of the values that I had grown up with. See, back home in Zambia, my parents welcomed strangers all the time, people we barely knew. And for me, walking into this stranger's house was not so strange after all. So once inside, the man leaves me in the living room and goes to the other room and comes back with the woman I'd met at Wagner College months earlier. And she introduces him as the husband. And shortly after, a young man about my age comes over and is introduced as her cousin and the person that I'll be staying with. Now, we had dinner after, but frankly, I was not listening to any conversation during the dinner because my interest was on the food that was being served on the table. Now, it's been about almost 20 years since that orientation, but I think about it often and how it really, really changed my life. If, for example, I hadn't worked at a summer camp and found it so rewarding, I probably wouldn't be doing the job that I do now, working for the Guild for Human Services. And I would probably, maybe, not have decided to come back to the United States. And I also learned one important lesson about cultural orientation, is that while it is important to learn about different cultures and respect its practices, it's also important not to take those practices to the extreme. And yes, I like that Americans like to look in the eye, and that they like to make small talk, and that generally they are on time, but not if being on time puts myself at risk. And really, I think the best way to learn about a culture is actually to live in it. This is true today, and even after all these years, I still find myself learning the culture of the United States. Thank you. You're muted.
You'd think I'd learn. I'm sorry. What I said is thank you, Miani. I loved your story. You had me on the edge of your seat. I really didn't know whether you were going to make it or not, but it's a really nice. I'm good now. I'm good. You made it. But I love the way that you talk about culture, and yeah, I agree. Like the only real way to understand culture is to kind of submerge yourself in it, and take the good and the bad, and we can kind of make a mishmash of our culture that we came from, and make our own kind of version of it. It's pretty cool. Right. I like so there's a lot to think about, a lot to unpack, but thank you so much for sharing your story. Like I said, we're all going to come back on after the stories and have a little chat, the chat back after. So I'll see you a little bit later, and I'm going to move on to our next teller. Our next teller is going to be Linda Grosser. Linda Grosser is also extremely talented storyteller. She was, for those who knew Mass Mouth, was in the Big Mouth Off at the Somerville Theatre a few years back. And she's agreed, we're lucky enough for her to come on our show and tell her story this evening. But I'm going to ask you the same questions. When was it that you first told your story on a stage?
Well, my first really official story on a stage was at Club Passim. And I had put my name in the hat that night. Never had told a story. I was advised I was going to have a beer beforehand, and someone said, no, don't drink anything. Put my name in the hat, and it just, from there, it's been a wonderful time.
Wonderful. I was actually there. I remember that. I remember it well, crystal clear.
Yeah.
And then, what is your favorite thing about summer?
No doubt it's the ocean. My grandparents lived at the beach. I would go to the beach. I'd come home with jars of shells. And now I walk the beach. I still come home with shells. I swim, and I just listening to the sound of the waves. It's like my most peaceful place that I like to go.
I'm with you on that one. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to hand over the stage to you, Linda. Take it away. Have fun. Tell us your story, please.
Great. Thank you. My son Spencer, he's very loving, but he's also kind of edgy. He's been to Burning Man. He goes to these trainings at this mystery school. So when he gifted me 2 tickets to an adult weekend called Soul Camp, I was a little skeptical. I asked Diane, my most free-spirited friend, to join me, and she passed. So I passed too. Later that year, I was hit with some awful, awful health issues, including getting cancer a second time. Anxiety. I didn't sleep for months. But I put one foot in front of the other. I went back to work, and I was okay. I was good. But when I turned 65, I'm thinking it is time for a new chapter. And I had the best retirement party that very next spring. So now I'm thinking, I've got a whole lot of time for new adventures. Maybe I should reconsider Soul Camp? After all, as a 10-year-old kid, I loved sleepaway camp. We would wash our hair in the lake every week. We drank bug juice, AKA Kool-Aid. We ate these disgusting Spam sandwiches on our hikes. What was there not to love? But more than that, camp was a safe haven away from my parents. My mother, she had bipolar. My father was depressed. I was like invisible. I didn't even know how I felt. And truly, I had no voice. At camp, I could leave all of that behind, and I was carefree. We would go out and dance around the flagpole in the rain and thunder in our underwear. So I decided I am going to Soul Camp. I asked Cheryl, this other very free-spirited friend, to join me. Cheryl, what's the worst thing that can happen? If camp is really stupid, we will go into town to the local bar on Saturday night. So we're in upstate New York, which is like a hotbed of summer camps. And it's the opening ceremony. And I find out that apparently I'm going to have just the best time of my life. Give me a break. And I find out if you want to send someone love, you send them a heart with your hands, and it goes whoosh. So I'm looking at the program. Where's the program? And I see numerology, how to talk to my pet, singing bowls, and a camp talent show. Well, I go off to the first session. This could only best be described as a class in spiritual fitness. So we're in the gym. It's 90 degrees. We are jumping up and down, and we are yelling, I am good enough. I am perfect just the way I am. I am lovable. I am sweating. As I'm listening to those words, I actually feel tears on my face. And for the first time in over a year, I have let myself feel that well of grief and some forgiveness for getting cancer a second time. But it's time for lunar astrology. I'm walking across the lush green lawn, and I meet up with this woman, Catherine, who apparently knew my son, Spencer, who had actually been a camper and an instructor previously at Soul Camp. And Catherine says, "Spencer is your son? Get out. That's awesome." Okay, I'm thinking, that's cool. Later, I'm walking to the lake, and I meet up with Eduardo. "You are Spencer's mother? I am so happy to meet you." And he gives me this great big hug. And lunch, Allison, she wants to take a selfie with me to send to Spencer. So let me just say, I'm now really starting to feel the groove of Soul Camp. So, I've been thinking about the talent show, and it would be really fun to participate, but I had no talent. And then out of the blue, I got inspired to tell this true, very personal story. Something that had happened on a trip 10 years before. And I'd only ever shared this with my therapist. I'd never been on a stage, and I didn't think I would have the nerve to do this. But then I'm saying, Linda, if there is ever a time and place that you are going to do it, it's here at Soul Camp. Saturday night, the talent show. And I hear my name getting called, and I'm going up in my jeans and my flannel shirt. And there, in front of about 200 campers, under the stars, I, who struggled so hard to find my voice, I tell my true story. The crowd, they went wild, cheering from the back. "We love you, Linda." Hearts whooshing at me. And I'm standing there just soaking up this Soul Camp love. And I'm feeling like when I was 10, dancing around that flagpole in the rain and thunder in my underwear. Thank you.
Yay! Yay! That's so cool. Oh, I love the imagery of dancing around. Yeah, I often think about dancing around with the lights off, but that's so cool. And you've got to tell your story.
Right. And that was actually the very first time, but I didn't want to, that was a surprise in my story, so I couldn't tell you that. Right after that, I went back home and I went to the Club Passim, and there it was. I put my name in. So
it makes me it gives me goosebumps and makes me all tingly, because I believe in the magic of storytelling, and I think anyone here kind of does too, and they can all speak for themselves, but yeah, that's the magic of storytelling. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Like I said, we're all going to come back afterwards to have a little chat, but I'm going to move swiftly on to the next storyteller, who is moi. So I'm going to be telling you a story, but I have to ask myself the same questions, because that's fair, really. The first time I ever told a story on the stage was actually at Club Passim. No, it wasn't, sorry. It was Trident Booksellers. On Newbury Street. It was a mass mouth event, slam, and I just needed to tell this story. I needed to get it off my chest. So I turned up, didn't realize it was a competition, won it, and things progressed, and I ended up in the big mouth of the grand finale. So that was pretty cool. And then when it comes to summer, I have to say, for me, is going back to England to go and see my family, because I don't get to see them very often. And it's sitting outside pubs and having pub grub, food, lunch, and a pint of beer with my family and my friends. And it's quite simple, but it's lovely, especially if the sun comes out, because that doesn't always happen in England. That's quite special. Anyway, I'm going to start telling you my story. So it's a couple of years ago now, and I'm stood in line waiting for my coffee at my local coffee shop and minding my own business. And there's two women, sort of older women, stood in front of me, and they're sort of just talking. And then my ears prick up because, when they're speaking. And what I hear is this one woman say, well, John and I, we were walking down the street last night, that street that runs along the back of Main Street. And well, that garden, the one with the washing machine in the front yard? Well, there was this really crazy lady, and she was sort of dancing around and being really strange around this washing machine. And she was trying to start a fire under it. And we were a bit worried. She was really crazy. And we thought maybe we should call the police. And the other woman said, well, did you? And she went, well, no. I mean, what are we going to do? Call the police and say whatever? Should we just look as crazy as she did? And I'm thinking, oh, well, that was me. Yes, because I live at said house with said washing machine in my garden, in my front garden. And this is not just any old washing machine. This is a 1940s Speed Queen washing machine, with the one with the ringer thing on the back. I love it. And I use it as a planter in my pollinator garden. And I put these big swaying ornamental grasses in it. And but it's an annual, so every year I had to dig out the roots and put a new plant in, and that's what I was doing. So it was kind of late spring, early summer, and I'm pulling all the roots out, and I'm up to my elbows in dirt, and I'm sweating, and all of a sudden I feel this searing pain all down my butt, my thighs. And I have no idea what's hit me. And I kind of scream, and I look down, and there is a cloud of yellow jackets. And I scream, and I run down the street round to the back of the house and practically fall through the back door. And the whole time the pain is growing and surging. And I'm screaming, Cyril, that's my daughter, help me, I have been attacked by bee wasp things. And what do I do? Help me. And she runs down, and she has a phone in her hand because she's a teenager. And I'm like, what do I do? And she says, okay, soap and water, wash the area, wash the stings, and then ice. And I'm like, quick, because I just totally overcome with pain. And so we ripped down my pants because they stung me through my pants. And oh my word, big, angry, swollen welts all over my butt, all down the backs of my thighs. Ew. And there I was for the next couple of hours, sat on the couch on top of packs of frozen peas and sweet corn and that pack of Brussels sprouts that no one ever could figure out what to do with. They do have a use. And just basically nursed my quite literally extra buttocks that I had grown all over my butt and legs. But I was angry. Because I had sweated over this project. I had done research. I had dug the ground over. I had got the right seeds. I had watered them. They were beginning to grow for these pollinators. And the buggers attacked me. So I'm like, I'm not having this. I'm not having this nest that's underneath my washing machine, and I need to get rid of it. And so I came up with a cunning plan. I snuck out in the dead of night. Well, it's kind of about 7, but I had to get up the next morning. And I dressed up with my hoodies and two pairs of sweatpants, and my hoodie all tied around my face. And I sneak up on them, and I have a metal colander pasta drainer thing, and I put leaves in it, and I set light to it, and it starts to smoke because this subdues them apparently. But the adrenaline is pumping, and smoke starts to billow. Nothing comes out. And I'm thinking, okay, this is really, really cool. I think we're okay. And then I became really emboldened. I thought, right, lighter fluid. And up it went. It felt really good. But what I didn't notice were two people walking past behind me because, well, our house is at the end of the street, so I'm kind of on a road into nowhere. We're not overlooked. This was not supposed to be observed. This was not a spectator thing. I hadn't considered this. And anyway, a couple of weeks later, finally, all the welts had started to go down, and I learned to love my buttocks just the way they were, which is a lie. Yeah, of course, that's a lie. But you know something? I am really, really relieved that I didn't have to tell that to the police. Thank you. Okay, so that was me. Introducing yourself is really strange. Okay, now our last teller for the evening is a friend of Shara and ours, very talented storyteller, and also a mass mouth storyteller from way back when, is Scott Schultz. Please can we have Scott Schultz on the screen?
Hi.
Hi,
Hi.
Scott. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Oh,
Nice
yeah,
to see you sitting.
I'm going to ask you those questions too. When was the first time that you told a story on stage?
Well, I used to do stand-up in the 90s, stand-up comedy. And so, for example, the story I'm telling tonight, I actually tried that on stage in my stand-up act back when this first occurred, back in the 90s, but it didn't really fit the flow of stand-up, which is set up, punch tag, X amount of punchlines and laugh lines per minute. And so I kind of shelved it for a couple of decades. And then one day I went to a poetry reading to support a friend. I was attracted to the hostess, and I wanted to do the show the next month. So I slid into the story space to rehearse it. So I wouldn't come off looking like a clown. And that was a storytelling room. So someone yelled out, "Don't read it, tell it." So I just put it down, told it, and felt natural and good. And then Ben Cunningham, who was the reigning Big Mouth Off champ at the time, was in the audience, and he told me about Mass Mouth and about the slams. And eventually I had an open day on the same time that a show was happening. So I went down there and to Doyle's in JP, Jamaica Plain, and I ended up winning the slam, and kind of got hooked because Nora and Andrea Lovett, Nora Dooley, Andrea Lovett, who were running Mass Mouth at the time, they went from the second I stepped in the room, they were hurting me, and they weren't letting me leave the program, and they ended up booking me for a couple shows right away, and eventually I won the Big Mouth Off 1 year later, and then moved to LA.
Cool. Not a bad story there in itself.
Happy ending.
What is your favorite thing about summer?
Well, my favorite thing about summer is in Los Angeles, I've been producing my show Busted for 8 years now, and that's always been an outdoor show. We do it on the back patio of this venue in the middle of Echo Park. So for me, the summer, because I've always done my show at 5 p.m. on Sundays, because it's for it's stories that take place on buses, and they're non-motorist stories, so they don't drive. So I said it a little bit earlier, and as a result, for us in the summer, we get all this extended sunlight at the end of the shows, and it just makes our shows longer because more people want to participate. Our audiences triple. I'm able to book bands at the beginning and the end. And those are my favorite shows of the year. And it's my favorite time to promote because it's nice out, don't have to wear 5 layers.
Before you tell your story quickly, because I want to make sure that I get this in and don't forget it. If anybody has any performances, shows, shout outs they want to do, can you put those in the chat for me when you're not telling, if you want to promote anything?
Oh, sure.
Please just do that. Put that in the chat to everybody so everyone
By
can.
the way, 2 hours from now on my YouTube channel, my Busted Bay Area, which we recorded last night on Zoom, has its premiere on YouTube.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, I do it a day ahead.
Put the link in the chat so everyone can see it. That would be great. Thank you. But I'm going to hand this.
I'll put it in the private chat, and then you'll need to transfer it into the comment.
Okay. So if Abby could put that in the comments, please. Abby's our.
Okay. Perfect. So I'll put it in there, but I'll tell the story first.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to hand the stage to you. Take it away, Scott Schultz.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. So I've always been a huge sports fan. I love baseball. Fenway Park is one of my favorite places in the summer. Back in the early 90s, I was living in San Diego. I'd just become a stand-up comedian. I was doing that full time. And I was going through the Alternative Weekly newspaper in San Diego. It's the Reader. That would be like the Phoenix or the Dig for San Diego. And they had a section in the classifieds, which would be like Craigslist in newspapers back in the 20th century. And there was a section called Actors Alley, where they'd have kind of auditions and commercials, things like that. And I saw that Major League Baseball needed some actors to dress up as baseball players for the upcoming All-Star Game Fan Festival, because San Diego that year was the host of the Major League All-Star Game. And Major League Baseball was beginning to work with interactive festivals, because this was the early 90s, and that was starting to become a thing. And this was the first ever Major League Baseball All-Star Game Fan Festival, like the full fan experience, where they could walk around in the San Diego convention. There was all sorts of cool exhibits, and there were Hall of Famers walking around, like the special guest manager of the American League, Ted Williams, who, of course, is one of the greatest athletes in Boston history, and also probably one of the 4 or 5 greatest baseball players of the 20th century. And also a bunch of current all-stars, and just a really good time for everybody. But they were short on enough ball players, and they just wanted to have some entertainment, kind of goofy players walking in the crowd, like your kind of Keystone Cops of baseball players, that could talk with little kids and stuff and make them enjoy the experience. So I go in for the audition process. They love me right away because I'm tall, I'm lanky, nice smile, goofy looking. So like, oh, we love him. I fit the uniform. So they're like, great, we're going to cast you. You're going to get $200 a day for 4 days and total access to this festival. We want you to act like you are a Major League Baseball player. And they said they're going to give me an official Major League Baseball player nickname, which they said, you're Spider Schultz. And I asked, why Spider? And the casting director, he was very excited. He goes, because you're gangly like a spider. And which I always thought spiders were kind of coordinated, because my experience is basically Spider-Man. But also gangly's kind of, a dig, but an insult. But they pay me $200 a day, and I got total access, and I got a Padres uniform, an actual uniform. So heck yeah, call me Spider. Totally cool with that. 8 arms for you. And so I show up the next morning, and I go to the actors' locker room, and my casting director's there. He's our manager, and everybody, because it's San Diego, so that's more of like a theater town, musical theater, and kind of deep indie theater. So most of the actors, they just didn't really look like athletes or ball players. And then there was one dude from San Diego State who was an assistant coach on the baseball team, who was there kind of like me, wanted to see the baseball players. And then for the others, it was more like an acting job. So I didn't really want to hang out with the actors because they were kind of blowing my baseball player vibe, because I was kind of in fantasy camp and they were more about acting. So I turned to the baseball coach from San Diego State, and I'm like, hey, dude, you want to let's go find Ted Williams? And so he's like, yeah, let's totally do that. So we leave the actors and we just walk around the convention center in our Padres uniforms. And I find Ted Williams. He's talking to these kids, so cool. I mean, he's probably like 75, 76 at this point. But still, he looks like the legend. He was like my father's hero and my grandfather's hero. Like I learned life lessons through the Ted Williams filter, like stories about how to like handle yourself when going to a job interview through a tale of like Ted Williams' perfect eye of the strike zone. You know, it's just how it worked in my house. It's kind of a Boston thing. So anyway, I see Ted Williams. It's super exciting, and then he makes eye contact with me and the other dude I'm with. The other dude looks like a player. He's a big guy. He played college ball. Me, I'm skinny. I got pipe cleaners for arms. So he looks up and goes, "Now I know you're a pitcher," which is kind of an insult for Ted Williams because he's like the greatest hitter of all time. And it's kind of a way of him saying like, "Son, you need to hit the gym. Weights and stakes." So I say, "Yeah, Ted, I throw junk." And I totally lied. And he gets up, and he runs up to me and he gets right in my face and he puts his fist right in front of my belly, like about, a couple inches away from it, but, belly height. And he says to me, "What are you doing? The pitch is here." I go, "Swing at it." He goes, "That's right. You'll hit it 1 out of 3 times." I'm like, all right. I convinced the splendid Splinter. Then he puts his hand over my head, like about 4 or 5 inches, like it's on a invisible halo. He goes, "What are you doing? The pitch is up here." I go, "Don't swing at it." He goes, "That's right. You'll never hit it." Then he gets very intense in my eyes. He goes, "What are you doing? The count is full." I go, "Swing if it's close." And he gets very excited and he musses up my hair and he goes, "You're good." And then he runs off and I never see Ted Williams ever again. And that's my whole exchange with him. So exciting. I would have called my grandfather on the spot, but back then that would have cost about $3 in coins, and that doesn't fit in baseball pants. So I had to call him when I got home. We end up going to lunch in the locker room with the team again. And my fake coach, he's like, "Hey, Scott, Spider, you got to hang out with the team, kind of stop wandering around. We're doing team stuff, team exercises. So be part of the team." But I'm not a team player. My character was more like the disgruntled lone wolf guy, So while they were playing running bases, I kind of wandered off to my corner of the dugout. And I was just kind of throwing the ball in the air and catching it because I was bored. I was just waiting for the day to end or look for an opportunity to slide off and like find Raleigh Fingers or Tony Gwynn or Cal Ripken or some of these awesome Hall of Famers that were walking around, or maybe just pick up some women or something. And I'm dressed like a baseball player, So while I'm there, this little kid walks up to me, like little 7-year-old or something with his mom. And he's like, "What's your name?" And I go, "I'm Spider Schultz." And he's like, "Why do they call you Spider?" And I'm like, "Because I'm gangly like a spider." And I do my little gangly thing with my hands. And then he hands me a baseball that's signed by Ted Williams and Raleigh Fingers and Cal Ripken and Tony Gwynn. He goes, "Spider, will you sign my baseball for me, please?" And like all of a sudden it becomes like serious because, this isn't like a baseball. This is like a very expensive piece of sports memorabilia collectible. I mean, it's worth thousands of dollars with these signatures on the ball. And I'm like trying to come up with an excuse, like to tip the mom, but without kind of blowing my cover and, saying, "Oh, I'm just a comedian and I'm not really a player." So I say like, "Well, I'd love to, Zach, but, I'm just a minor leaguer. So, you don't want me signing this." But he was insisting. He's like, "Oh, please, Spider, you're my favorite player. Please sign it." And I was like, "Well, Coach really doesn't like me signing stuff, until I make the team official." And he goes, "That's okay, Spider. I'm your biggest fan. Please sign it, please." I said, "Please, please, 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 please." And like, I'm just like, I don't want to do it because like I'm picturing like him back with his father or his, grandfather or whoever. and he's looking at the ball, like going over the history of the sport with this little kid. Like, yeah, Ted Williams, he's the greatest player in baseball history from Boston. Tony Gwynn, a 12-time All-Star. Cal Ripken, he was the Iron Man. And then he'd see my signature and be like, who the heck is Spider Schultz? And as the value of the baseball drops from $5,000 to $20. But I just sign it because the mother she says, just sign it, because she wasn't a baseball fan. And, she probably thought I was a real player, So I was like, fine. Spider Schultz, number 33. I wish it was like a hat so I could write like stay gangly or something like that. He's like, thanks, Spider. And he runs off. And the mother's like, thank you, Spider. That was really nice of you. And I felt good, I signed an autograph. I kind of burned $5,000 value on this kid's ball, but he's probably just wants the ball for the ball, not as a collectible. So I felt good about myself. And then I looked up, and there was just a ton of kids in line, and they were just waiting for my autograph, by Spider Schultz. So I ended up signing stuff for like the next hour, 30 minutes, whatever. Maybe it's 20 minutes. Time flies, like when you're signing stuff. So I was signing hats and balls and little things like that. I'd ask kids like, what are you doing? The pitch is up here. And, good, that's good. You don't swing if it's close. So the next morning, I show up at the convention center. I go down to my fake dugout, and my fake manager is sitting there waiting for me with an envelope. And he says, Spider, Major League Baseball is officially upset with you, and we no longer need your services, because they'd found out I was signing autographs instead of being a team player. But they paid me for the full 4 days, which was awesome. And I got to keep my hat. So my Padres hat, whatever. I'd rather have a Red Sox hat. So I ended up running home, paid my rent, took the rest of the money, put it in the bank, took a little bit more out, returned to the fan festival, this time as a fan. And that's my story.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you so much for sharing that. I bet there's a whole bunch of kids with their merchandise, with their Spidey Schultz, and they're like frantically looking up on Google and they just can't find anything. Think somebody you need to say, it was me, this is why, this is my story, because they're all like totally bemused. They're like, but I did see this guy and he did sign my hat or whatever. Yeah.
Maybe a couple of them became storytelling fans. And they'll be like, oh, this is even better now.
Yeah. And it's like, this was supposed to be worth quite a lot of money, and I'm not sure that it is anymore.
Oh, I just looked up when I was preparing the story. How much is a Ted Williams autograph worth now? $2,999. And how much with Spider Schultz on it?
Yeah.
$29.
Could I please, Abby, could I please have everybody back on the stage now, please? On the screen. Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for sharing your stories. Oh, you've all gone spinning on me. Yay, we've got you. Yes, so thank you so much for sharing all your stories, all really different, going off in different directions. There's lots to think about there. But in the time we've got remaining, I'd really like to ask each of you the same question, another question, because you talked about where you started out in storytelling. Where, even though, like Miyani, you were just, it's just a few months ago that you started, but have you seen like a transformation? Has anything changed in your life since you started telling your stories? Did it change the way you just feel or think, or has it empowered you, given you a voice? What would you say? So if I start with Mark, because you told your story first, what would you say?
Well, as you kind of alluded to at the beginning, I am much more comfortable doing it than I was at the start. Now, so like, okay, fine, I'll get up in front of a few hundred people and tell a story. The way I put it at the Moth was, it's at most 5 minutes. It's wasting 5 minutes of my life, but it's wasting about 6 months, man-months of everyone else's life in the room. But it's 5 minutes, and it's done.
Yeah. Not 6 months. No. But thank you for sharing that. It is, yeah. I guess if you were that sort of quiet, shy person, you're certainly not. Like I said, you're a cucumber, cool as a cucumber. So thank you. And then Muyani, what would you say in your short time of storytelling? How is it sort of has it transformed anything about you?
Oh yeah, I've become more in tuned to try to capture anything going around me. Um, Life is a challenge, but what I've found out is these experiences are commonly shared. So just whether it's Scott, whether it's Linda's story, whether it's Max or you, Anne, you find that we were all laughing in the background, I'm sure, because we've all somehow been in all those situations, and that's something that has changed in me. I'm just more in tune to everything happening now.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because that's something that I notice all of the time. You know,
Yeah.
somebody could tell a story about having to land a plane because the pilot passed out, having never flown a plane before, and you think that's not relatable. But once people start telling their story and they give us some internal dialogue of how they thought and how they felt, that they were scared, felt scared, that's relatable, overwhelmed, questioning themselves, overwhelming sense of imposter syndrome, an overwhelming sense of people relying on you to be able to land the plane properly, and other relationships. So much. It's not just somebody that lands a plane. It's all the other things that are relatable. So in each of your stories, I've never walked in your shoes. You're all very different to me, but I related to lots of little bits in your story. So I thank you for that. It's really kind of sweet. And Linda, what would you say if there's anything transformed you since you first told your story?
I would say for me, the process of looking at parts of my life as a story have really caused me to make to make meaning out of things that maybe in the past I just would have let go. But the principles of a story, right? There's a conflict, there's a meaning, right? All of those things. So when I'm crafting a story and I'm like, well, what did that mean to me? And sometimes it's not really sure, and I have to do some really deep reflection to figure out what was something about. And so it's kind of like a whole new way of just seeing my own life and in a really enriching way that's given me a lot of pleasure and just feeling good, feeling fulfilled about learning about myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I agree. I think it's interesting when you go to tell a story and you think that you're cool with telling the story and you know all about it, and then somebody asks you a question that seems obvious to them and you hadn't thought of it, and then all of a sudden a penny drops in your head and you're like, oh, I hadn't even seen it like that. I hadn't thought of it like that. And you can all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I thought I understood what happened, but I didn't. We learn these lessons. And then Scott, what would you say? What's the biggest transformation that's happened to you in all those years?
Well, I'd say the biggest transformation is that I ended up devoting 10 years to it, because that's kind of big in itself. Kind of became my be-all, end-all producing shows and stuff. But as a writer and a performer and a storyteller, I think that for me, the biggest advantage from entering storytelling is that as a writer, I was always more of a verbal exchanger and verbal kind of filter process as compared to just sitting down at a desk with a pen and paper. My stories were always verbalized and formed that way. And because of the storytelling format, it's allowed me to really dive into that and made me very good at that. And as a result, it's made me a better writer. But it's also by discovering this process of like taking a moment in time and turning it into a 5-minute tale or a 7-minute arc. What it does is it allows me to just really become extra prolific and and find the diamond in the coal, find the scent in the rose. I mean, you walk by, you see the flower, that's nice, but when you have to turn it into 6 minutes, you kind of get a feel for the stem. You take a look at the thorns, you look at the petals. It's kind of like when I was in college, and they would give you like a 12-line George Herbert poem or something, and they'd say like, all right, write 9 pages on this. And it's like, it's 12 lines. And it's like, well, what do those 12 lines mean? And that's kind of what storytelling is a lot of the time, where you're finding just a moment in time, whether it's like I was lost in the city, or I entered a camp, or I'm in Alaska and I'm stuck. And then it's figuring out, okay, now what is that 5 minutes in that like 5-day period? What is the 5 minutes in that 2.5 days of chaos wandering around New York City? And then once you have that skill, you always have that skill.
Yeah.
Well, one of the big realizations, kind of going back to what Linda and Anna said, a lot of people sitting in the Moth, when you come back to the table, will say, well, I don't have any stories about landing a plane.
Yeah.
They have this, like, it has to be big.
Right.
And what they don't really realize is that it's, like Anna said, it's the relatable things. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter kind of what the action is, it's the humanity of it that people identify with.
At the Busted shows, we always have like a curated half, and then the second half is audience anecdotes, which is almost like a slam. I let everybody go up. So sometimes these shows, like in the summer, we go 3-4 hours. They get really long, and a lot of the time, people don't even know they're going to a show, let alone going on stage when they arrive, because that's just the nature of the show. People come in, they sit down, and all of a sudden there's a show. And they didn't even know, they thought they were just hanging out in Echo Park for the day. And then they go on stage, and and I let them know, it's like the shocking stories are the things that people remember, but it's the community stories and the anecdotes that keep people coming back, because people want to be part of a community, and people want to be able to identify. And that's what brings people to the Mass Mouth, the Tell&Acts, the Passims, the Doyles, the Tridents, the parking lot shows.
Yeah, I would say I would also agree, with everything everybody said. I think that's some really good points there. I'm going to have to wrap up in a minute, but what I just wanted to sort of talk a little bit about Tell&Act, what we're doing, because one thing that Tell&Act does is we also work with Stories from the Stage, which is a PBS show produced by World Channel in collaboration with GBH Events. And we're just coming to the end of our 4th season, and we are just preparing our themes for our 5th season. So we're really excited about that. We'll be starting filming that in September. We're not going to be filming over the summer, but Cheryl, my business partner, and I have been really busy putting together our relatively new business. And basically we use the art of storytelling to transform business, people's businesses, personal lives, and communities. So we have lots of programs. We have some classes starting in June, and lots of programs that you can see at Tell&Act. So Abby, if you could please put our webpage address in the chat, that would be really, really good. And also next week, Thursday, there'll be the next episode of Stories from the Stage that's airing. So we're really excited about that one. We've been having lots of fun with that. What else must I say? I've done that. Okay, so at this point, I just have to say thank you. Like, really thank you so much for all coming on the show and sharing your stories and your ideas, and your points of view are really kind of valuable and interesting. And I'd like to thank Abby and Club Passim for hosting. You've been wonderful. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all so
Thank you.
much for telling. Thank you, Anna, for hosting. We cannot wait to get you back in the club when it is safe to come back to Passim. Both you veterans and those of you who haven't been down in our little basement, we cannot wait to all be in the same room doing this again. Thank you all for tuning in. If you would like to help support both Passim and Tell&Act, you can donate to this show at passim.org/stream. We recommend a $12 donation, but anything helps, as well as sharing this stream. This will remain up online, so if if you have friends that you think would enjoy some of the stories that we heard tonight, please feel free to share this with them. Thank you all, and we will see you next month for our next session of Tell&Act.